Yes, look me in the eyes, Lucia. Do you really think my life is worth so little that a cheap superstition of a employee I saved her? She should be thanking me for not throwing her out on the street for being hysterical. A simple gas leak that my maintenance team should have caught. Don't get me wrong, you're not a hero, just a wet nuisance. Now, go upstairs and dry off, and learn your place in this house. Alejandro Salvatierra, the tycoon, said it with a coldness that was more chilling than the torrential rain that night in Lomas de Chapultepec. He had just survived an imminent explosion thanks to that woman's desperation, but his pride, cemented in the marble of his mansion, prevented him from accepting vulnerability. Lucia Ramirez, soaked to the bone and trembling with fear and humiliation, could only nod, feeling the weight of the truth against the wall of his disbelief. She had seen the danger, but he only saw her social position in the hall of her opulence. The lightning flashed across Alejandro's face for a moment, revealing a mask of exhaustion that neither the expensive designer suit nor the business success in Los Angeles could hide. His business trip had been a financial success, but the return home had turned into a near-fatal encounter with his own mortality. The mansion, once a symbol of his triumph, now seemed like a silent mausoleum, waiting to be consumed by a fate he had eluded by a millisecond. Lucia, her lips trembling, recalled the image she'd seen when she'd arrived at work hours earlier. The gas meter with a strange reading, a barely perceptible hiss in the air. New to the service, she'd hesitated to call the police or maintenance immediately, fearing being fired for a false alarm or taking an initiative that wasn't hers. The hierarchy and the fear of judgment were almost as potent as the real danger, but as she saw Alejandro's car approaching, the instinct for life overcame all timidity. He ran across the cobblestone garden, the water beating against his legs and his heart pounding in his throat. "Don't go in, sir! There's a leak!" His cry was only a murmur against the fury of the sky, but the force of his desperation had penetrated the armored glass of the luxury vehicle. Alejandro, more out of astonishment at the maid's audacity than out of conviction, had stopped. The sound of a crack electrical shock and the subsequent pop of the minor explosion confirmed his warning. The incident, although controlled by Lucia's luck and swiftness, left a trail of burning odor and tension. Camila Robles, Alejandro's fiancée, came down the stairs with impeccable elegance and even colder disdain. "Alejandro, fire her immediately. A woman screaming in the entrance is an unacceptable scandal. This is an attempt to gain attention, a crude emotional manipulation to secure her position. If there really was danger, she would have called the fire department, not staged this pathetic circus. Her hysteria has damaged the image of our house. Let her leave before the wedding is any closer." Alejandro looked at her. Camila's words were logical, cruel, and aligned with the world he knew. But the image of Lucia, trembling in the downpour, didn't fit the mold of a manipulator. There was genuine fear in her eyes, a brutal honesty that wasn't bought or rehearsed. Doubt settled, fine as dust, between the reality of her life and the possibility of a real threat. "No, Camila, she's staying. For now, until the pipeline inspection is completed by outside experts." Lucia felt a small, almost imperceptible triumph, not for her work, but for her life. She wiped the raindrops from her face, trying to ignore the sting of public humiliation. The mansion was a gilded cage, yes, but it was also a labyrinth of hushed secrets and shadows. What she had sensed wasn't just the gas, but something darker, something intentional and perverse. The air was thick, and not just from the humidity. There was malice floating among the expensive paintings. Alejandro turned his back on her, going upstairs to his office. He didn't say thank you, just clean up the mess in the entryway. The ingratitude hit hard, but Lucia was already used to being invisible. While scrubbing the damaged marble floor, she noticed something odd near the ventilation duct, a small piece of industrial-grade duct tape, not the kind used by the house staff. It was a signature, a tiny detail that pointed to professional, meticulously planned sabotage. She picked up the fragment, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night's chill. That tape was proof, a silent promise that the danger would return, more cunning and more lethal. The mansion had been narrowly saved, but Alejandro's life was at stake, and she, the woman worth less than a broken vase in that house, was his only defense. Her heart closed, letting in only resolve. She wouldn't let him die, not on her watch. Why did that woman know he was going to die? If you're hooked by this dramatic beginning, subscribe so you don't miss how Lucia saves the millionaire. Alejandro turned his back on her, going upstairs to his office. He didn't say, "Thank you," just clean up the mess in the entryway. The ingratitude hit hard, but Lucia was already used to being invisible. While scrubbing the damaged marble floor, she noticed something odd near the ventilation duct. A small piece of industrial-grade duct tape, not the kind used by the house staff. It was a signature, a tiny detail that pointed to professional, meticulously planned sabotage. The incident had cracked the mansion's facade of normalcy, like a disturbed reflecting pool. Lucia tried to explain to a skeptical Alejandro that she had heard something, not just smelled something, in the plumbing, an out-of-place metallic sound, as if a valve had been recently and clumsily manipulated. He listened impatiently, his eyes fixed on his phone screen, more interested in a stock market report. "Noises, Lucia. Old houses make noises. They're not conspiracies, they're physics and wear and tear. If you can't clean up without making up stories, we'll have to reconsider the arrangement despite Camilla." The decision to keep her in the house, only until marriage, was a double-edged sword for Lucia. It gave her access to investigate, but kept her under the microscopic and hostile surveillance of Camilla Robles. The fiancé treated her like a freak, a stain on her impeccable pre-nuptial organization, assigning her the most complex and humiliating tasks, looking for the mistake to justify her immediate dismissal. Lucia accepted the pressure silently, aware that every day she remained was another day of Alejandro's life. However, the house responded to the tension with strange phenomena that only Lucia seemed to notice. Second-floor closet doors slammed shut when no one was around. The recently serviced alarm system triggered false alerts at 3 in the morning, disrupting sleep, only for technicians to find no fault upon arrival, labeling the incident a software glitch. Alejandro attributed it to stress and the bad weather, but Lucia sensed the heavy atmosphere, almost charged with intent. In the kitchen, the staff murmured about the new employee's bad luck. "She brings evil with her," they whispered, avoiding her gaze as if she carried the plague. Lucia withdrew even further, finding solace only in the solitude of her tiny utility room. There, she would remove the piece of tape and examine it in the dim light, feeling the texture of betrayal. It was a tangible link to the attempted murder, a secret that bound her to the tycoon in a dangerous way. One afternoon, while cleaning the library, she found an old ledger, forgotten on a shelf. Flipping through it, she found 2 yellowed photographs of a fire at a beachfront house in Malibu. They were gruesome pictures, with black smoke and charred ruins, which Lucia quickly hid in her apron pocket, feeling she had stumbled upon a pain Alejandro was trying to bury under tons of new business. The man who had humiliated her wasn't just arrogant. He was a broken man living with a ghost. Alejandro's duality confused her. So ruthless in business, so careless about his personal safety. Who else's toe have I inadvertently stepped on? She had wondered aloud one night, without waiting for an answer. Lucia, listening behind the wall, understood that the attack was not personal against her life, but professional against her legacy. Someone wanted to hurt her empire, and his heart broken by the past made him blind to the danger of the present. The house that remained silent was not just the mansion. It was Alejandro himself who refused to heed the warnings. Lucia decided she couldn't trust anyone but her own eyes and ears, not even the police inspector. Outside forces, the staff, and especially Camila, were tainted by luxury and lies. Her surveillance became silent, almost ghostly. She moved through the house unseen and unheard, observing the interactions, the gestures, the charged silences between Alejandro and his fiancée. Camilla's sweetness was like poisonous honey, and Lucia, for the first time, felt panic for the man. One night, a glass tumbler broke in the living room display case for no apparent reason. It just exploded. The sound made Lucia jump, and Camilla shout a name under her breath, "Ramiro!" But upon seeing Lucia, Camilla instantly recovered, smiling with unnerving perfection. "You see, Lucia, this house is haunted, full of nerves and omens. You should pray more and clean better." Lucia said nothing, but the spoken name and Camilla's icy gaze were etched in her memory. Lucia's fear wasn't for the ghost, but for the woman who inhabited the mansion with such ease. If Camilla was responsible, the gas bomb had been only a draft, a failed test, and the real plan was underway, designed to be definitive and, above all, undetectable. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a pause, the moment before the final thunderclap fell. Lucia felt an urgency burning in her stomach. Time was running out for Alejandro and for her. The audience begins to doubt. Will Lucia be superstitious or the only lucid one? The flames of the past are still burning, and they will burn into the present. Alejandro woke up again, bathed in sweat, the silk sheets clinging to his tense body. It was the same dream, vivid and cruel. The smell of gasoline and burning wood, the scorching heat. And worst of all, the heartbreaking cry of his little son, lost in the chaos of the Malibu fire, an event that had erased joy from his life and replaced it with chronic guilt. The trauma was his shadow, a self-imposed condemnation that had haunted him for a decade. Lucia, whose utility room was attached to the master bedroom wall, heard the muffled murmur. They weren't words, but moans of deep pain, the lament of a father who had failed in his most sacred duty. She recognized the sound. It was the echo of a wound that no fortune could cauterize. She stood up silently, and without knowing why, she looked for a small white candle and a match. She lit the tiny flame in a ceramic dish and left it in the hallway outside her door. That candle wasn't just a light, it was a prayer, a small act of kindness toward a tortured soul. It was the perfect contrast to the mansion's dark luxury, a flicker of simple faith in a place of cynicism. Lucia imagined Alejandro as a child, before wealth and tragedy seeking solace. She knew pain made him vulnerable, but also that it was the only path to truth. The man who had humiliated her deserved a ransom, not just physical, but of his soul. The next morning, Alejandro noticed the candle. It was almost burned out, and the wax had melted onto the plate. It was an anachronistic detail in a hallway filled with technology and minimalist design. He asked the housekeeper, the cook, and the night watchman. No one knew anything except Lucia. "A small fire to ward off the big one, sir," she murmured, without looking him in the eye, wiping the plate with a slowness that only people who have suffered understand. He felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Disinterested curiosity. "Do you believe in those things, Lucia? In omens? In the power of a candle?" She straightened, and for the first time looked at him with a firmness that wasn't defiant, but sincere. "I believe in what is unseen, sir. Houses hold what people forget or hide with money. You can buy silence, but you can never extinguish the memory of your own fire. And the smoke of the past is what is clouding the danger of your present. It is blinding you." Her words were a direct blow, unfiltered by servitude. Alejandro felt exposed. The loss of his son was the taboo of his life, the wound that neither Camilla, nor his partners, nor his psychiatrist would touch. Only she, the employee, the wet nuisance, had seen the scar and pointed it out with a simple flame. The conversation ended abruptly when Camilla appeared impeccable in her morning attire. "Alejandro, what are you doing wasting time with superstitious nonsense? We have to review the wedding menu." Lucia withdrew, but the exchange had shifted something subtle between them, an invisible line. She was no longer just the employee, she was the uncomfortable guardian of a secret and a pain. Alejandro, for his part, began to observe Lucia with a new intensity, not as an employee but as a beacon that, despite its insignificance, continued to shine in the darkness of his house. He wondered if fate had spared him from the explosion only to force him to confront his past. The photos Lucia had hidden were burning in her pocket. They were more than just images of a fire. On the back of one, a faded note read, "Failure, Salvatierra, P. 2015. The P clearly referred to Alejandro's father and the year to the Malibu disaster, not the boy's death. This implied that the fire, the one that killed her son, may not have been an accident. It was a terrifying thought that connected the personal tragedy of her past to the attack on her life today. Lucia felt the weight of this revelation like a physical burden, the heat of injustice. If Alejandro's father had faked a fire, what had really happened that night in Malibu? And why was Camilla so keen to keep Alejandro distracted, away from any introspection? The scheme of betrayal was now larger, encompassing generations and family secrets. The truth was a monster with tentacles, and one of them had already grabbed the tycoon's throat. The small fire in Lucia's candle had been lit, and now it burned with the force of a revelation. It was a light that promised to consume the lies and purify the stale air of that house. Alejandro, unknowingly, was approaching the precipice of his own history, forced to see what he had avoided. The connection between Malibu and the gas leak wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern of destruction. And the flame of the past, which had never been extinguished, was about to ignite the truth in the present. The wounded pride of a powerful woman is more dangerous than fire. Camilla Robles was the definition of controlled perfection, every hair in its place, every word calibrated. At a business dinner with important executives from Wall Street and Mexico City, she glowed with a poisonous splendor. Lucia, invisible as a shadow, served the table with the precision that training had conferred on her. But Camilla's elegance was only armor, and Lucia was the only visible hole in it, a crack. Every time she passed by, she felt the cold breath of contempt, the irritation of the fiancé at her mere existence. The culminating moment of humiliation came with the service of red wine, an expensive Brunello. Lucia, concentrating on filling the bank president's glass, accidentally brushed Camilla's shoulder. It wasn't a spill, just a brush, but Camilla's reaction was theatrical and calculated for the audience. She put down her glass with a sharp clap and looked Lucia up and down with an expression of utter disgust. "Oh, please, Alejandro, do we really have to tolerate this kind of service? It's unacceptable," she continued, her voice clear and penetrating to ensure everyone, including the guests, heard her. "This woman doesn't even know how to use a glass, how to social distance, or even the basic etiquette of a house like this. You look like you picked her up off the street, darling. Her ineptitude is an embarrassment to our future union. Fire her now in front of everyone so she understands that mediocrity has no place in our circle. It's not a favor to me. It's a favor to your image and that of your company. It's an unnecessary expenditure of dignity." Silence fell over the mahogany table. The executives looked at Alejandro, waiting for his authoritarian reaction. Camilla had overstepped an invisible boundary, using his power to fuel her own cruelty. Lucia felt the floor sink beneath her feet, her cheeks burning with humiliation. An inner voice screamed at her, "Run away, go away, let him burn himself." But she stood firm, unmoving. She no longer feared dismissal. She feared Camilla's satisfaction at seeing her broken. Alejandro, however, did something unexpected. He placed his hand over Camilla's, a gentle but firm pressure. His voice was deep, with no trace of anger, but rather an unexpected authority that wasn't directed at Lucia. "Camilla, I set the etiquette of this house, and my etiquette dictates loyalty over formality. Lucia saved me from a death that, coincidentally, your maintenance staff was unable to prevent. If anyone has proven inept in this house, it hasn't been her. So, Please behave. And I remind you, this dinner is about business, not your ego. The wine is excellent." Camilla's face transformed. The perfect smile crumbled for a millisecond into a grimace of pure hatred. The air electrified between the couple, a silent battle for dominance that the guests barely noticed. Alejandro had defended her, not out of love or attraction, but out of a primal instinct for justice. It was the first time he'd publicly put her in her place, and the blow had been stronger than an insult. Lucia, in the gloom, felt a glimmer of hope. The tycoon still had a core of decency. Dinner continued, but the dynamic had changed irrevocably. Camilla was no longer looking at Lucia. She was looking at Alejandro with an intensity that promised revenge. Her once sparkling eyes had turned cold, like two pieces of ice ready to cut. She had tried to humiliate Lucia to reassert her power and secure her position, but Alejandro's unexpected defense had turned the act into a personal offense. As Lucia cleared the plates, she noticed Camilla's hand trembling slightly as she held the glass. It was the crack in the armor, the moment when wounded pride transformed into implacable resolve. She knew she had signed her own death warrant, and Alejandro's with that defense. The perfect fiancé would no longer play at happy marriage. Now she would play at elimination. The danger in the house had intensified, shifting from careless sabotage to active malice. For the rest of the night, Lucia worked with the awareness that she was the house's #1 target. She moved cautiously, her senses on alert. The sound of Camilla's heels like a war drum. Alejandro's silence was now a burden. He defended her, but he didn't protect her. He was an accidental ally, a pawn in a much larger game of power and betrayal. Lucia wondered if money and luxury always corrupted the soul in that brutal way. The hook is the wounded pride of a powerful woman is more dangerous than fire. If you feel the tension rising, subscribe now and witness how Lucia unmasks the fiancé. A name returns from the past, and the line between business and betrayal begins to blur. Lucia, while folding clothes in the laundry room overlooking the service yard, noticed movement. A man, disheveled and dejected, was hovering by the garden fence, staring at the mansion. He wore a cap that hid his face, but his posture was familiar, laden with palpable guilt. She felt a chill. This wasn't a burglar, but someone who had been a part of that house's life. She waited silently, knowing that fate doesn't accidentally place a stranger lurking in Lomas de Chapultepec. The man waited for the security guard to leave on his patrol before approaching the side door. It was Diego Salgado, Alejandro's former personal driver, fired months earlier under dubious circumstances. Lucia hesitated for a moment to open it, remembering Camilla's security warnings. But the desperation on Diego's face defeated her. He looked like a ghost seeking peace. She opened it just a crack, her heart pounding, ready to flee or scream if necessary. "Don't trust anyone, not even your fiancé," Diego whispered, his voice rough with fear and resentment. "Tell Don Alejandro to check their cords maintenance from 3 months ago, the ones on the water pump. There's a name that doesn't fit. I lost my job for trying to warn them. Don't be another victim, I beg you. You saved him from the gas. Now save him from the truth that's eating him up inside, the one he doesn't want to see." Diego slipped a folded envelope into Lucia's hand, and before she could respond, he disappeared into the night. Lucia slammed the door shut, her mind reeling. The envelope contained blurry copies of maintenance invoices. They were technical documents for the supposed repair of a water filtration system that never broke down. The name that stood out, repeated several times on the approval and payment signatures, was Ramiro Fuentes Alejandro's senior partner at the Los Angeles Investment Fund. The line between business and home had blurred. The danger came from the elite of his own circle. The presence of Ramiro, a family friend and confidant, on trivial maintenance documents was an anomaly. Why would the Los Angeles partner be signing off on minor repairs to the Mexico City house? Lucia remembered the name Camila had screamed when the glass broke. Ramiro! The connection was inescapable. The fiancé and the partner were accomplices, plotting Alejandro's death. The gas attempt hadn't been an accident. It had been an act of betrayal orchestrated with business-like precision. Lucia waited for the right moment. Alejandro was in his office, working on an important presentation. She entered under the pretext of refilling his water glass, the envelope in his pocket burning her skin. She surreptitiously placed the envelope on top of the pile of documents he had to review, between a contract and a report. "Sir, Mr. Diego Salgado, the former driver, asked me to deliver it to you. He said it was urgent," she murmured, feeling like an undercover agent, a spy in a corporate chess game. Alejandro, without looking up from the screen, waved his hand impatiently. "Diego, throw it in the trash, Lucia. That man is a bitter man who's been trying to extort me since his dismissal. His word is worthless. Get rid of this paper and get back to your duties. I'm not a complaint center, and don't accept anything from strangers on the property again. It's a serious security breach, understood?" Lucia felt the failure like a kick in the stomach. The tycoon was blind, deaf, and stubborn. She reluctantly picked up the envelope, but as she did so, with a swift, covert movement, she extracted Ramiro Fuentes' invoice, leaving it on the desk, just below the keyboard, where it couldn't be completely ignored. "Understood, sir. It won't happen again," she said, and left the office, leaving the evidence in the center of the hurricane. Diego's confrontation, Ramiro's name, and the mounting danger made her stronger and more determined. A name returns from the past, and the line between business and betrayal begins to blur. The public already knows the truth, but Alejandro still lives within the lie. Lucia was dusting the mantelpiece, the quietest spot in Alejandro's study, when she heard Camila's voice. The fiancé was on the balcony, speaking softly on her phone. Her tone was urgent, the whisper laced with obvious fear, but also with cold intent. Lucia froze, feeling her body turn to stone, lending every fiber of her body to the conversation. She knew this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the ultimate test he couldn't ignore. "Ramiro, you have to calm down. The gas was a mistake, a reckless act. We can't fail this time. Alejandro is paranoid, and that woman, the maid, is driving him crazy with her omens. She thinks I know something. We have to get ahead of ourselves. The wedding is in a month. There's no time." Camilla paused, listening to the response on the other end. Her breathing labored in the silence. "Yes, it won't fail this time. The electricity, an overload in the air conditioning system in your wing. It'll all look like an accident, a regrettable technical failure due to bad weather and old wiring." Lucia's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a plan, it was the timing of her death. The overload, the air conditioning, the technical failure. It was the same pattern as the Malibu fire. She acted on instinct. She took out her cell phone, an older, discreet model, and pressed the record button. She kept the device hidden in the palm of her hand, pretending to clean a non-existent stain on the floor. Every word Camilla said was recorded, the sound of her icy voice sealing her own doom. Camilla continued, her voice taking on a perverse intensity, filled with greed and repressed resentment. "Do you think I've endured this man and his ghost for 10 years only to walk away empty-handed? I'm the only legitimate heir to what we built, Ramiro. The dead child took Alejandro's mercy. Tomorrow at midnight, when I'm alone reviewing the paperwork for the new business, no one will suspect. The insurance will pay. And finally, we'll have what we deserve. Together." Lucia felt nauseous. The coldness with which he mentioned the dead son, the cruelty. Greed was a bottomless pit, and the plan was as sophisticated as it was despicable. Alejandro wasn't dealing with an enemy, but with two vipers in his own bed. She finished recording, her finger trembling as she stopped the app. The truth was no longer a suspicion, but an audio file, a silent weapon. When Camilla entered the study with a sweet and falsely concerned smile, Lucia was already on her feet. Lucia, darling, are you still here? You should take a break. You look pale. Ask the chef to make you some tea. The tension in this house is affecting everyone, isn't it? Her voice was that of an actress. The malice vanished beneath the mask of the concerned wife. Lucia just nodded, her face expressionless, her phone tucked away like a cursed diamond. She went up to her room, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins, the weight of responsibility. She had the proof that would save her employer's life and dismantle a financial conspiracy. But how would she deliver it to a man who only saw her as a low-class, superstitious woman? Alejandro's disbelief was her greatest weapon, his shield of arrogance against any uncomfortable truth. The challenge wasn't finding the truth, but getting the tycoon to accept it before it was too late. He reviewed the audio, checking that the recording was clear, that Camilla's voice was unmistakable. He realized that if he handed it over directly, Camilla would deny it, accuse him of fabricating evidence. He needed a plan, a way to make him hear his fiancée's voice without her presence. It was a dangerous game. If he failed, she wouldn't just be fired, she would be permanently silenced. Midnight the next day was the deadline, and the clock was already ticking fast. The conversation had left her exhausted, but with a terrifying clarity of mind. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, protective fury toward the man. Lucia promised herself she wouldn't allow a good man, no matter how arrogant, to die for greed. She had nothing to lose, no status, no money, no reputation, only her life, which was already simple. And that simplicity was what made her invisible, and now, the most dangerous of all. The public already knows the truth, but Alejandro still lives within the lie. The hero drives away the one who saves him, and the fire is brewing. The atmosphere in Alejandro's office was dense, heavy with the weight of an unspeakable truth. Lucia had entered without asking permission, her eyes fixed on his, her cell phone extended like an offering. Mr. Salvatierra, please, listen to this. It's urgent. It concerns your life and Camilla's. Alejandro looked at her with a mixture of tiredness and irritation, his patience finally exhausted. What now, Lucia? Another omen? If it's not about your work, don't waste my time. She pressed play. Camilla's cold whisper filled the silence. This time it won't fail. It'll all look like an accident. Tomorrow at midnight it'll all be over. No one will suspect. Alejandro stood motionless, his face a marble white, the hand holding the pen trembling. The sound of Camilla's voice, so intimate and so laden with betrayal, was impossible to ignore. The audio ended. Absolute silence. The world seemed to have stopped in that office. He slowly rose from his chair, his voice a suppressed roar, filled with furious disbelief. You're lying! You're lying! What kind of trick is this? A voice-changing app? Do you really think making up such a crude recording is going to get me to give you a raise or a permanent position? Camila and Ramiro are my pillars. My fiancée, Lucia. She's the only one who cares about me. Alejandro grabbed the phone from her and threw it against the Persian rug, the impact cushioned by the luxury. Get out! You're fired! Right now, pack your things and leave. I never want to see you again. You disgust me, Lucia. Using tragedy and malice to manipulate is the lowest I've ever seen. Leave, and pray I don't call the police on you for attempted extortion and slander. Camilla is an angel, and you're a liar. Leave before I change my mind and report you. Heartbroken, Lucia picked up her broken phone and felt the injustice burn in her eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't cry with rage. She only felt a profound sadness for the man's blindness. She had risked everything for him, and he had thrown her out onto the street, choosing his fiancée's lie. Lucia turned to leave, but remembered the plan she had devised in her desperation. With a trembling hand, she left the phone on Alejandro's desk, the same place where she had earlier left the bill. It's not a trap, sir. It's your life. Listen to the rest of the audio. Please, for your son. The mention of his dead son was the final blow. The last plea he allowed himself. He left the office and the mansion, feeling the fresh air as a punishment rather than a liberation. He left crying, the cry of powerlessness, of a woman silenced by power and class. He left his cell phone on the table with a second recording hidden in the device's memory, a backup that would activate at a specific time should he ignore the first. Alejandro was left alone, panting, staring at his phone. His anger was fading, replaced by doubt. What if Lucia wasn't lying? What if Camilla's voice really meant what he'd heard? His rational mind, trained for skepticism, struggled with the visceral terror the audio had provoked. He looked at his watch. Midnight was the hour. Time was running out to unravel the hidden truth. The hero drives away the one who saves him, and the fire is brewing. Now he knows, and pretends not to know. 2 nights after Lucia's departure, the rain returned, heavier and more dramatic than before. Alejandro was alone in the mansion, the silence broken only by the tapping of water against the glass. Camilla had gone to a business dinner with Ramiro, a pathetic excuse for being out of the house. The tycoon wandered the halls, the same faint but persistent smell of gas tormenting him. The house was a monument to loneliness, and he, its prisoner, waiting for the fateful midnight. He stopped in his office. His eyes fell on Lucia's cell phone, forgotten in the darkest corner of the desk. It was an act of impulse, of desperation. He picked it up, feeling the device's cool temperature between his fingers. He opened it, and the voice memo menu appeared. The first recording had already been deleted, so as not to leave any traces. But the second, the backup, had been automatically activated at the time Lucia had scheduled. He pressed play. His body stiffened as he heard Camilla's voice, this time with terrifying clarity. "Tomorrow at midnight everything will be over. No one will suspect. It's an electrical accident. Don't forget, Ramiro." Then a cruel laugh, a sound he hadn't heard before in his fiancée's voice. "Alejandro is so predictable, blinded by the pain of Malibu. He hasn't even reviewed the documents I left behind. He never worried about money, only guilt. And that guilt will consume him in the final fire." The audio ended, leaving an echo of malice that resonated off the walls of his office. Camilla's face, the perfect woman, froze in his mind, transformed into the mask of a demon. Disbelief had shattered. Denial had evaporated. Only cold, lucid terror remained. His fiancée, his partner, the people he trusted most, were plotting his death out of greed. And Lucia, the woman he had humiliated and fired, had been his only guardian angel. He realized the magnitude of his mistake, and the utter loneliness he found himself in. Alejandro, however, didn't allow panic to paralyze him. The businessman took control. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his breathing quickening with the urgency of the moment. Now he knew, and the only way to survive was to pretend he was still the blind, arrogant man. If Camila and Ramiro thought he was unprepared, they would be making a fatal mistake, an overconfidence. The chess game had changed. Alejandro was no longer a pawn, but the king preparing his checkmate. He acted with the precision of a commander. He reactivated the mansion's security system. He discreetly called in a team of trusted technicians to install hidden cameras in the main wing. He contacted Inspector Ramirez of the district attorney's office, an old business contact in Los Angeles. "I need your help, Inspector. This is a confidential investigation into insurance fraud and possible attempted murder. The target is me, and I need everything to look like a false alarm, a paranoid act of mine, until midnight tomorrow." The plan was risky, but bold, to catch them in the act, using the mansion as a stage. If he survived, the trap would be twofold. The police would arrest them, and the cameras would have the irrefutable proof. The night passed slowly, each sound of rain a step closer to midnight. Alejandro sat on the couch, waiting, Lucia's phone in his hand, his only connection to the truth. He wondered where she was, if she was safe, if she knew he had finally heard her. In a small rented room in Puebla, Lucia prayed, the candlelight slowly burning. Not for herself, but for the man who had scorned her. May nothing happen to him, God. May he hear me. Her faith was her only grounding wire, her armor against the darkness of the betrayal she had witnessed. She didn't know her recording had been listened to. She only trusted that the truth would prevail. Midnight was approaching, and everyone was breathing the same flammable air. Now he knows, and pretends not to know. If you've made it this far, subscribe to see how Alejandro uses Camila's betrayal to his advantage, a plan within a plan, and everyone breathes the same flammable air. Alejandro woke up with a calm he hadn't felt in years, a clarity that danger had restored. He simulated normalcy perfectly. He had breakfast with Camila, discussed the details of the wedding with feigned enthusiasm, and even hugged her, feeling the thrill of contact with the woman who was planning his death. The performance was impeccable. Every gesture, every smile, a silent stab of anticipation. Camila, in turn, seemed sweeter and more caring than ever, malice hidden beneath a veneer of love. That morning, he contacted his trusted lawyer. He didn't reveal the plan, just a strange order. I want my entire estate to be placed in a trust under the name Fundación Hogar Seguro if anything happens to me tonight. And I want the first person contacted to be Lucia Ramirez, my former employee. She'll be the president of the foundation, not my fiancée. Keep it discreet, but non-negotiable. The lawyer, accustomed to the Salvatierra family's eccentricities, carried out the order without question. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Lucia returned with the courage of desperation. She had taken a long-distance taxi, paying with her last savings, guided by a feeling. She couldn't sit idly by, waiting for the announcement of the man's death. She approached the mansion from the least guarded side, scaling the garden wall with the agility of necessity. She hid in an old storage room in the garage, ready to bear witness, or to die with him if necessary. Inspector Ramirez from the prosecutor's office contacted Alejandro. We're in position, Mr. Salvatierra. 2 undercover units ready for the signal. Remember the protocol. Let the act be consummated. We need the evidence, the flagrant crime. Don't risk your life, please. Leave the house at the last minute. Alejandro smiled inwardly. His plan was much riskier than the one the inspector knew. In his office, Alejandro dropped a clue, a lure in the trap he'd set. He called Camila, his voice filled with panic. Camila, I just received an urgent report. Ramiro has delayed the transfer of the funds from Los Angeles. I need to work late. I'll be alone. I have to redo the paperwork. Don't wait up for me, love. I'll call you later. The message was clear. He was alone, vulnerable, and distracted by the source of the greed. Camila, on the other end, couldn't hide a note of triumph in her voice. Oh, darling, how sad. But don't worry, I can stay with you, or better yet, go rest. I'll check on you. Alejandro refused, reaffirming his solitary presence in the main wing of the house. No. It's something only I can check. Go to sleep. I'll be fine. I love you, my love. It was the cruelest and most necessary lie he had ever told, a man's farewell to his tormentor. Lucia, in the garage, felt the cold air. She heard the sound of Camila's car leaving and then returning. Her heart sank. Camila had returned earlier than expected to make sure the job was done. Suddenly, she heard a creak. A man was coming through the back door of the garage, a briefcase in his hand. It was Ramiro Fuentes, the partner, his face tense and his eyes filled with ruthless ambition. The man moved cautiously, heading for the main fuse box near Alejandro's office. Lucia, paralyzed, watched Ramiro open the fuse box and then pull some thick cables from the briefcase. The sound was minimal, but in the midnight silence, it sounded like thunder. He was wiring something, manipulating the main wing's electricity in an intentional and lethal way. The overload plan wasn't a simple fire. It was an electrically driven explosion. Time had run out. Lucia prepared to run, to scream, to do whatever was necessary, but Alejandro's figure appeared in the hallway in the darkness, like a ghost. Always so predictable, Ramiro. Money before friendship. What a shame! Alejandro wasn't in his office. He was hiding, watching. Lucia stopped. Alejandro's plan was in motion. The house burns, but power changes hands. 23:45, the hour of judgment. Camilla discreetly left the master bedroom, wearing a silk nightgown that contrasted with the darkness of her intentions. She headed to Alejandro's office, where his computer light was still on, the perfect decoy. In the garage, Ramiro Fuentes, the trusted partner, was finishing his work on the fuse box. The air had become unbreathable, charged with static electricity and the promise of destruction. Lucia watched from the shadows, feeling the tension, her body ready for the final leap. Alejandro, however, wasn't at the desk. He had hidden behind a marble column. He watched Camilla enter the office, her face illuminated by the light from the screen, a cruel smile. Then, he saw her go to the air conditioning panel on the wall, a small gesture. She wasn't just going to kill him, she was going to make sure the act looked like a climatic accident, leaving no loose ends. Camilla took out a gold lighter, a birthday gift from Alejandro. She lit it, the small flame dancing in the darkness of the office. Always so predictable, Alejandro. You think your money makes you invulnerable, but it's your weakness. Camilla approached a bundle of loose wires Ramiro had left near the fuse box. The Iscaro approached slowly, the flame about to touch the conductor. It was the point of no return, the moment the lie would turn to ash. A click! The sound came from Ramiro's hand. The circuit closed. A small, controlled explosion occurred, not the fatal one, but the one he and the inspector had planned. The lights went out in the main wing. The smell of ozone and burning filled the air. Camilla screamed, frightened by the loud bang, dropping the lighter, which fell harmlessly to the floor. Ramiro cursed in the darkness, knowing the plan had failed once again. At that moment, the emergency lights came on, revealing the scene. Camilla's scream caught in her throat as she saw Alejandro emerge from the shadows. And the worst part, the small red lights flashing on the walls, the hidden cameras. Too bad, Camilla. The accident isn't going to work this time. Those cameras have recorded everything. The betrayal, the greed, and the attempted murder. Everything that defines you. Good work, Ramiro. Before Camilla or Ramiro could react, the sound of sirens filled the garden. Inspector Ramirez and his undercover men entered through the front door, guns drawn. Camilla screamed, this time in rage and despair, as she watched her perfect world crumble. Ramiro tried to flee but was immediately arrested, the evidence in his briefcase incriminating him. Power had changed hands. The blind had seen, and justice had arrived at the door. Lucia emerged from the shadows of the garage, covered in dust and ash, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from relief. The man was alive. The fire had been contained. Alejandro looked at her, his eyes filled with overwhelming gratitude. The silence between them was a confession. "I told you, sir. I told you," he murmured, unable to say more, his body slumping with exhaustion. The house burns, but power changes hands. If this climax has left you breathless, subscribe now to see the Millionaire's redemption. The fire is over, but the family inferno has only just begun. The police had taken Camilla and Ramiro away, handcuffed, the shame of their betrayal exposed to the world. Inspector Ramirez, on his way out, stopped next to Lucia, who was still sitting on the stairs. "Your courage, Miss Ramirez, saved Mr. Salvatierra's life and solved a case of corporate fraud. The recordings and your testimony are irrefutable. Justice will be swift in this case. You are a silent hero. Please don't leave. Mr. Salvatierra needs you now more than ever." Alejandro, speechless, approached Lucia. There weren't enough words to apologize for the humiliation he had inflicted on her. He knelt before her, covered in ash, his clothes torn, his suit worth millions destroyed. He hugged her with a strength that wasn't romantic, but rather one of survival, the grip of a man reborn. The smell of burning and fear still lingered in the air, but the fire had cleansed his soul of arrogance. "Thank you, Lucia. Thank you for not abandoning me, despite how stupid and blind I was with you." Lucia reciprocated the hug, the pain of humiliation replaced by the peace of a mission accomplished. "You saved me first, sir. You gave me a roof over my head. You gave me a chance to do the right thing. Money is worthless without life, and your life, however arrogant, is valuable." They separated, and Alejandro looked at her with a reverence he'd never shown anyone in his life. She was no longer the employee. She was the woman who had lit a light in his darkness. The following hours were filled with cleaning, reporting, and a heavy silence that followed the storm. Alejandro sat in his office, now a mess, and stared into space. The danger was over, but the revelation of Camila and Ramiro's betrayal had left him even more alone than before. They were his chosen family, his inner circle, and they had revealed themselves to be ruthless predators. Money, which had always been his shield, had become his death sentence. The real hell, however, had just begun. With the arrest of Ramiro, his partner, the police, and the district attorney's office began investigating the company's finances in Los Angeles. What they found was a trail of fraud, embezzlement, and a pattern of financial manipulation. Ramiro's name was linked to past property fires, fake insurance policies, and scams. The connection to Alejandro's past was inescapable, and the truth was coming closer. Alejandro felt forced into a sudden trip to Los Angeles, not for business, but for the truth. He had to face the demons of his past, which were no longer just ghosts in his dreams. Inspector Ramirez had left him a confidential file, which included the report on the Malibu fire. "It says that your father, Don Pablo Salvatierra, was investigated for possible insurance fraud, but the case was closed. The same methods Ramiro and Camila used. I don't think it's a coincidence, Mr. Salvatierra." The tycoon boarded his private jet, file in hand, a lead weight on his chest. The fire that had killed his son, his greatest tragedy, may have been a family business. The name Salvatierra no longer meant saved land, but sold and burned land. Evil wasn't out there with corporate enemies. It was in the DNA of his fortune. The man who had humiliated Lucia was a product of a dynasty of liars and swindlers. He arrived at his Los Angeles penthouse and locked himself in. He opened the file, the smell of old paper and ash. Photos of the Malibu fire, the police reports, his father's signatures on the insurance documents. The pattern was identical: electrical tampering, overload, and a multi-million-dollar insurance policy. The only difference, his young son had died in the fire, unexpected collateral damage. Alejandro Salvatierra collapsed on the marble floor. The fire was over, but hell was just beginning. The enemy was not outside. It was in the blood. Alejandro Salvatierra lay on the floor of his Los Angeles penthouse, surrounded by evidence. The luxurious space, with its panoramic view of the Pacific, was now the scene of his moral ruin. The police file, open on the floor, revealed the truth his subconscious had always feared. His father, Don Pablo Salvatierra, a revered man in the business world, was a criminal. Fraud, staged arson, bogus insurance policies, all meticulously planned to increase the family fortune. The trauma of Malibu returned with brutal clarity. The flames, his son's scream, the guilt. He had always believed it was his fault, that he had been negligent in not checking the smoke alarms. Now he understood. The fire in his Malibu home hadn't been an accident, but a failed business venture. His father had ordered the destruction to collect on a policy, unaware his grandson was home. His son's death was the tragic and unexpected collateral damage of the family's ambition. "My name never meant anything. Just a well-dressed lie," Alejandro muttered, his voice breaking. His entire life, his business ethics, his arrogance, had been an attempt to distance himself from his father's greed. But the money he inherited, The foundations of his empire were stained with his own son's blood. He realized that Camilla and Ramiro weren't just swindlers, they were disciples of the same school. They had only wanted to repeat the business his own father had started, using the same methods. Camilla's betrayal had been a replica of her dynasty's original sin. She didn't just want him dead for his money, but because he was the only honest thing left. The pain was unbearable, a mixture of mourning and rage. She wept for the child and for the man he believed himself to be. The weight of the Salvatierra fortune, once a source of pride, had become a tombstone. She wondered if Lucia, in her humility, was the only truly rich person she had ever known. Alejandro spent hours reviewing the documents, looking for a way out, a denial, a mistake in the report. But the evidence was solid. His father's signatures, the payments to Ramiro's companies, the boss. The fire hadn't just burned his house, it had burned his identity and his lineage. The tycoon had been saved from death by his employee, only to be killed by the truth. The wealth he had so revered was a veil hiding a moral decay that had lasted generations. He stood, his face hardened by cold resolve. He couldn't run away from this. He couldn't build a future on a foundation of lies and tragedies caused by his own blood. The only way to redemption was sacrifice, the dismantling of his empire, brick by brick. He had to clear his name, not with money, but with justice and an unprecedented act of humility. The arrogance was gone. Only purpose remained. He remembered Lucia's words. Sometimes God extinguishes with fire what a man writes with lies. The fire in his life had been twofold, the attempted murder and the revelation of his father's sin. Both had served to purify his vision, to force him to see reality without the filter of power. His father's legacy wasn't business, it was guilt, and he was going to pay for it. The enemy was in the blood, yes, but salvation lay in choosing to be different. He contacted his lawyer to begin the process of liquidating assets and donating. I want all the money not legally tied up to be transferred to the foundation we created. The Salvatierra name will not inherit a fortune stained by blood and fire. The lawyer, surprised, tried to argue, but Alejandro's voice was firm, unwavering. The man had died in the fire, and the one who survived was a new person. The pain of losing his son now took on a new, deeper, and more bitter meaning. It was no longer just neglect. It was his family's greed. Alejandro knew that redemption wasn't a check. It was a lifetime of service and reparation. His trip to Los Angeles, which had begun as a search for evidence, had ended as a confession. The enemy wasn't outside, but in the blood, and he was willing to shed it for the truth. Redemption begins where pride ends. Alejandro returned to Mexico City, not to the mansion, but to the silent search for Lucia. He had sold the Los Angeles penthouse and the Malibu house, shedding the ashes of the past. He drove his own car, without a chauffeur or security guard, an ordinary man in search of something more than money. He finally found her, not in a place of luxury or comfort, but in a small church in Tlalpan. She was kneeling, her candle lit, with the same simple faith that had saved him. He sat in a pew behind her, waiting patiently for her to finish her prayer. The stillness of the place was a balm to his tortured soul, a contrast to the noise of betrayal. When she stood up, she saw him. There was no surprise in her eyes, but a calm acceptance. Lucia had known he would return, that the truth would lead him to her door, to her simple faith. She led him outside to the small church garden where the flowers grew with humble tenacity. Alejandro couldn't look her in the eye. His confession wasn't to ask for forgiveness, but to free himself. Losing my son destroyed me, Lucia. But losing faith in what I believed myself to be almost killed me. I was an empty, arrogant man who judged everyone by their social position. I refused to believe him because I couldn't conceive that evil was in my house, in my bed, in my blood. Now I know. My fortune is tainted. My father was a criminal. My life has been a lie. She continued, her voice barely a whisper, filled with shame and pain. "I humiliated you because you represented the truth I wanted to ignore. You're not the employee. You're my savior. Not just from the flames, but from the darkness in my soul. I've sold almost everything. The money will go to a foundation that helps people like you, without a voice. I don't know how to start over, Lucia. I'm alone. Without my son, without my fiancée, without my past." Lucia approached him. The woman who had been fired took his hand with undeserved sweetness. "Sometimes, God extinguishes with fire what man wrote in lies, Mr. Salvatierra. It's not a punishment. It's a cleansing. The fire has shown you that true value is not in the marble of your house, but in the heart that beats with truth. You are not alone. The truth will always be with you. Use that truth to build a home, not a mansion. A home for those who have nothing." Lucia's hand was soft and warm, an anchor in the storm of his life. Alejandro felt a wave of peace wash over him, the first in 10 years. Redemption wasn't an event. It was a process, one that began with the surrender of his pride. He stood up, a changed man, unburdened by money and the burden of family lies. The tycoon was dead, and a philanthropist, guided by humility, was born. The hook of this chapter is redemption that begins where pride ends. If the emotion of this confession has touched your heart, subscribe to see the happy ending and Alejandro's new path. From luxury to dust, the protagonist finally understands what home is. The sale and donation of Alejandro Salvatierra's assets caused a scandal in Mexico City and Los Angeles. The news filled the headlines. The millionaire strips himself of his fortune. Salvatierra's sacrifice. The mansion in Lomas de Chapultepec, the Malibu penthouse, the art collection. Everything became capital for the Hogar Seguro Foundation. With Lucia's help, Alejandro purchased an old-school building in Tlalpan, a poor neighborhood, and began the project of transforming the space into a haven of hope. The Hogar Seguro Foundation became Alejandro's goal, to rebuild his life on solid foundations. The place welcomed domestic workers who had suffered abuse, women in vulnerable situations, and orphaned children. Alejandro, once a business shark, now used his intellect to manage the charity's logistics. He directed the construction projects himself, worked with his hands, and learned the names of each person he helped. The dust of construction was more honest than the marble of his former life. Meanwhile, Camila Robles and Ramiro Fuentes faced a brutal public trial. Lucia's recordings, the evidence of fraud, and the connection to the Salvatierra family's past were irrefutable. They were sentenced to long prison terms, the price of greed and betrayal. Their downfall was a warning to the corporate world. Luxury doesn't always mean impunity. Justice, slowly but surely, had prevailed over the power of money. Lucia was the co-founder, the director of operations of the foundation, the soul of the project. Her humble vision and compassion were the driving force behind every decision. She taught women to read, mothers to sew, and children to dream without fear. Alejandro watched her work with silent, profound admiration. She had turned the house that was about to burn him down into a place of refuge, of true safety. The contrast between his former life and his present one was striking. Alejandro no longer slept on silk sheets, but in a small apartment adjacent to the foundation. He no longer drank expensive wines, but rather morning coffee with the women he helped. The guilt over his son's death had transformed into action, into a mission to save other children. Luxury had been a gilded prison. The foundation was his true freedom. People wondered if Alejandro and Lucia's relationship had become romantic. But their bond was deeper than love. It was the connection of two souls saved by fate. He was the financial protector, and she was the moral compass, the unwavering heart of the work. Their respect was mutual, their commitment unwavering. They were partners in redemption. The mansion had been sold to create this new safe home, and the investment had been worth it. The foundation grew, inspiring other millionaires to look beyond their own mansions. Alejandro used his influence, but this time for good, not power. He had found a purpose, a place where the Salvatierra name could mean something honest. The memory of his son was no longer just pain. It was the reason for every act of charity. He had traded vanity for humility, ego for empathy. The real home is not marble, but human connection. The official opening day of the Hogar Seguro Foundation. The old school building, now renovated, shone in the Tlalpan sun, full of life and laughter. Dozens of journalists, benefactors, and local people gathered to celebrate the miracle. Alejandro Salvatierra, dressed in a simple suit, stood on stage, nervous but serene. Beside him, Lucia Ramirez, wearing a simple white dress, radiated humble happiness. The journalists surrounded Alejandro. The question on everyone's lips was the same. Mr. Salvatierra, after selling a multi-million-dollar estate, why call the foundation safe home? He took the microphone, his voice resonating with a calm authority that didn't require shouting. He looked at the crowd, then at Lucia, and a genuine smile, his first in years, lit his face. Security, ladies and gentlemen, can't be bought with alarms, walls, or bodyguards. He paused, letting the silence grow, allowing the truth to seep into the air. Safety is found in the truth. I lived in a mansion that was a ticking time bomb, surrounded by people who wanted me dead, blinded by pride and arrogance. The day I was saved, I realized my true home wasn't that marble house. True home is a place where someone warns you, even if it puts your life at risk. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Lucia, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. This foundation is called Safe Home because a woman no one listened to, an employee I humiliated and fired because of my blindness, was the one who saved my life. She taught me that the dignity of a human being is worth more than all the gold in the world. She gave me my home by giving me a purpose, and that purpose is this place. The evening light filtered through the windows of the old building, bathing the scene in a golden warmth. Alejandro and Lucia held hands, their connection sealed by fire and redemption. The camera slowly moved up, leaving the building, the people, and the celebration behind. The once burning mansion, the symbol of luxury and betrayal, was now just a distant memory. The protagonist had found his path, and the maid had found her courage. If this story of betrayal, redemption, and the true search for home has inspired you, don't forget subscribe to the channel for more dramatic and exciting stories. Always remember that your true value lies not in what you possess, but in the truth and goodness you carry in your heart. Sometimes the greatest wealth is found in the humility of those who have the least, and the greatest security in the simple faith of those who believe in life. Never underestimate the voice that warns you, no matter how humble its origin.